In a quiet neighborhood, a wheelchair-bound single mother struggles to keep her life together. But when a group of thugs starts harassing her, things take a dangerous turn. They're looking to take advantage of her vulnerability, pushing her to the brink. With each day, the tension builds, and she's left wondering how much longer she can hold on. But little do they know, her son, a Marine, is home on leave, and he's ready to do whatever it takes to protect her. The question is, will he get there in time? As the situation escalates, it's clear that the thugs have no idea what they're up against. What happens next will leave you questioning who the real victim is. Stay tuned. For weeks, the harassment had become unbearable. At first, it was small things, rude comments, taunting her as she tried to manage her everyday life. But then the threats started. They would circle around her home at night, knocking on her door and demanding money she didn't have. Her neighbors turned a blind eye, too scared to get involved. The mother, always strong, now found herself trapped in a corner, questioning whether she could protect herself. She had never expected this from the world around her. She'd survived so much in life, but this felt different. Every time she heard the footsteps outside her door, her heart raced, knowing that danger could be just a breath away. The thugs were relentless, and there was no telling how far they'd go. What was coming next? As the days passed, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Each morning, the mother checked the locks on her door with trembling hands, hoping it would be enough. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The thugs weren't just random criminals. They seemed to know exactly when she'd be alone, when she'd be at her most vulnerable. Their threats were becoming more specific, more personal, and she began to wonder how they knew so much about her life. Was someone watching her? Did they know about her past? She wasn't just a single mother struggling to make ends meet. There was a history she had buried deep. Years ago, she had made enemies, and though she had left that life behind, some things never truly disappeared. What if the thugs were connected to that old world she thought she'd escaped? The mother tried to brush off the fear, but it gnawed at her. Meanwhile, her son, stationed miles away, had no idea what was happening at home. He'd left for the Marines with the hope of leaving their troubled past behind. But now, with each passing day, something told him he needed to come back. Back in her quiet home, the situation was spiraling. The thugs were getting bolder, standing outside her window, shouting insults, throwing rocks. She had tried calling the police, but they were slow to respond, dismissing it as petty harassment. Little did they know, the violence was building, and she was losing control. Every knock at the door felt like a warning, but there was no one to turn to. As the tension built, the mother's thoughts constantly turned to her son. Would he make it home in time? Would he be able to protect her? The uncertainty was unbearable, but one thing was clear. She couldn't face these men alone much longer. The harassment reached a boiling point one cold evening when the mother heard the familiar thud of footsteps outside. This time, they were louder, more deliberate. Her heart hammered in her chest as she peered out the window, half expecting to see shadows looming under the porch light. But there was no one, just the dark emptiness of the street, mocking her fear. She tried to shake off the chill creeping up her spine, but the unease only deepened. The thugs had been quiet for days, but she knew something was coming. She'd overheard whispers through the thin walls of her house, talk about coming to settle things. She didn't know what that meant, but every fiber in her body told her it wasn't good. Then the phone rang. It was her son. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, trying to steady her voice. He had been stationed far away for months, and now, just as she was spiraling into fear, he was finally calling. It was the lifeline she'd been waiting for. But there was no time to explain, no time to ask for help. "Mom, I'm coming home," he said, his voice steady. "I've got a feeling something's wrong. Stay safe. "I'll be there soon." She wanted to believe him, but the fear was already too heavy. The feeling of being watched was almost suffocating now. The doorbell rang twice, then 3 times. Her pulse raced as she moved quietly toward the door, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. She couldn't let them in. She wouldn't let them in. But before she could react, the sound of shattering glass broke the silence. A stone, just like the ones they had been throwing, crashed through her window. She froze, staring at the jagged edges of the glass glinting in the dim light. Then voices, harsh, cold, and cruel, shouted from outside, taunting her. "You can't hide forever, lady." She was trapped. They were closing in. Her son, miles away, was just starting his journey back. But would he make it in time? The clock was ticking, and she was running out of time. The stone through the window was just the beginning. The thugs, emboldened by the shattered glass, began to pound on the door, their voices growing more menacing with every hit. Her breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her hands fumbling for something. Anything to defend herself. But what could she do? She was alone, confined to a wheelchair, and they knew it. Then through the chaos, something unexpected happened. The faint sound of a car engine rumbled down the street, growing louder with each second. Her heart leaped. Was it her son? But as the headlights flashed across the front yard, she saw something that stopped her cold. The vehicle wasn't his. It was a black van. The same van she had seen parked near her house on several occasions, but always at a distance. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but now, standing in the doorway with the thugs closing in, she realized something darker was at play. The van wasn't just part of the neighborhood. Its presence here meant the stakes were higher than she had imagined. Panic swirled inside her as the door shook again, this time with more force. But just as the thugs were about to break through, something strange happened. The pounding stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that sent a shiver down her spine. Then the van's doors opened. 2 men stepped out, but they weren't thugs. They wore uniforms, military camouflage. Her pulse quickened. Who were they? They didn't look like local law enforcement or even the typical muscle she had feared. One of the men approached the door, knocking gently but deliberately, like someone who knew exactly how to handle a situation like this. She couldn't breathe. Was it really happening? Were these men allies or enemies? Could they be connected to the people she had tried to leave behind all these years? Her mind raced, and before she could make sense of it, the door was forced open with a single, swift motion. Her world tilted as the men stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room with military precision. And then one of them spoke. "We need to talk." But what did they want? And why now? Her heart was pounding in her ears, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. And just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her son. Asterisk, Mom, I'm almost there. Stay hidden. I'll protect you. Asterisk. But was it too late? The 2 men in camouflage stood motionless, sizing her up with cold, calculating eyes. For a moment, she thought she might faint, but she steadied herself, her mind racing. Asterisko were these men asterisk, her son was just moments away. Could he handle this? Or had he already walked into something far worse than she could imagine? "Who are you?" She finally managed to ask, her voice shaky but firm. Her mind screamed for answers. The man in front stepped closer, his face stern but oddly calm. "We're here to protect you," he said, and there was something unsettlingly familiar about his tone. "You've been targeted by people you once knew. They know your past, and they sent these thugs after you." Her heart skipped a beat. Was it really happening? Was her past finally catching up with her? Before she could respond, the phone buzzed again. Another message from her son. Asterisk, I'm almost there. Just hold on a little longer. Asterisk. A rush of emotions flooded her. Relief, fear, confusion. But the moment was shattered by a loud crash from the other side of the house. The thugs had found another way in. She wasn't safe here anymore. The soldiers moved fast, positioning themselves at the door, their weapons drawn, their movements precise. But then the final shock hit. The man who had spoken to her earlier, he was on the phone, talking to someone urgently. It's starting. We need to get her out of here. Now, the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't just military personnel. They were part of something much bigger. An operation. Step away from my mother, he said, his voice cold and steady, eyes locked on the soldiers. The standoff was electric. The thugs outside were waiting for their moment, but it was clear now this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the truth. As her son stepped forward, the man who had spoken earlier glanced at the soldiers, a silent command passing between them. Don't shoot unless we're given orders. Everything hung in the balance. The tension was unbearable. The soldiers looked at her, then at her son, then at each other. It was clear this moment would define everything. The past, the choices she had made, and the future of her family were all on the line. But just before anything could escalate further, another sound pierced the air. The unmistakable wail of police sirens, growing louder, faster. In that moment, the soldiers hesitated. Her son took a step forward. The final decision was coming. Would they fight, or would they let the past remain buried? As the sirens grew louder, the soldiers made a quick decision. With one final glance at her son, the man who had spoken to her gave a curt nod. This isn't over, he muttered, before signaling his team to retreat. They vanished into the night, leaving her standing there, shaken but alive. The thugs outside were gone, and the tension in the air finally started to lift. Her son rushed to her side, his hands gripping hers tightly. You're safe now, he whispered, relief flooding his voice. They both knew that this moment was only temporary. The past had a way of catching up, but for now they were together. As the police arrived, she looked at her son, finally understanding. Some battles never truly end, but with him by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could face whatever came next.